why do we do this? We've been talking about maybe the impact that we're hoping to make, but there's a lot of work that goes into this volunteering and to creating a show like this. Not just the folks that everybody sees here having this conversation, but all of the incredible crew that we show at the end of the show, the folks that are working behind those scenes, the folks that are donating and participating in the organization. I mean, there's a lot of effort and energy that goes into what we put out into the world. And so I'm curious for y'all how you got interested in participating in that work. I mean, putting that volunteerism, putting that effort into a project like this. Laura, how did you, for one, get started?
So how I got started in activism in general is different than how I got started in activism with atheist activism. But
Yeah.
I think that's where we're going, and that is probably where I'll start. Unless you want me to go way back to my teenage years. But I honestly like when I started digesting a lot of more science-based YouTube channels, and then they started like sort of migrating on the suggested video list, started getting further and further away from strictly science-based videos into more commentary and debates and stuff like that. Eventually, I stumbled upon videos of the ACA produced, and I just kind of got hooked.
Hmm.
And I listened like avidly to pretty much every show. And I know you guys remember me before I even became a face on the ACA. I was the one in like the psychosexuality chat, like just chatting it up. And so it was just something that really caught my attention and I was passionate about. But what got me started was listening to what people had to say and realizing that I had something to say too.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I'm sure that a lot of you listeners out there are probably just like this, where you're like, oh, I would have said this, or if you'd only just put it that way, or if I was on, here's how I would have explained it. Or wow, they explained it perfectly, but here's like a different way. And so for me, it was just a matter of, you know, I have the intelligence, I have the voice, I have the articulation. I could do this and I want to. Like I want to say something about this because I'm passionate about it.
Sure.
So, yeah, I mean, putting it that way, it can sound kind of selfish and it was, right? But ultimately the goal is to get as many voices out there as possible and to get some of this stuff heard and discussed and talked about. So even though it might be my selfish desire to just, get my 2 cents out there, I think it ends up helping in the sense that more people are talking about it, more voices are being heard, and I'm able to share whatever little nuggets of information I have, good or bad, with the rest of the world and keep the conversation going and flowing.
Yeah, no, and I'd like to stress that this is not just a convenient talking point for a volunteer organization looking for volunteers,
Right.
but I have frequently heard Dr. Daryl Ray, who founded this show, and Kara, we're going to hear a little bit about your story. I'm sure that's a name that may come up, but he talks often about the maybe the necessity of volunteering for living like a happy, healthy, fulfilled life, and I would sincerely challenge folks listening to recognize that, whether it's with the ACA or has anything to do with YouTube or sex or atheism or whatever else, that if there is not some part of your life where you are working towards something better and bigger for the world at large, it's not just that the world is missing out on that labor. It's not just that you like owe 10% tithe to your community or anything quite like that, but it's meaningfully important, I think, in feeling connected to your world and feeling effective or hopeful about the world. And I think there's a lot of personal value that maybe can get overlooked. But Kara, tell us a little bit about how you got headed in this direction.
Yeah, you pretty much summed it up there, Christy. Totally agree on all of those points. It is kind of as you describe. I actually got started with activism, if you will, while I was in grad school.
Mm,
I was doing my PhD in anthropology at the time, and I have always found education, in and of itself, education for education's sake, to be fulfilling and
sure.
interesting to me. And I think some of that comes from, in the background that I grew up in, science in particular, but, learning in general, if it's not about the Bible, is frowned upon. And that was not consistent with, my personality, I guess. I'm curious and want to know things and ask the questions and poke the bear and, be a irritating little snot sometimes, I guess. So um, that was, I'm sure, very upsetting for some of my teachers when I was younger, but I had a genuine interest in learning, and I found, education to be very fulfilling. But by the time I got to grad school, I was getting pretty burned out because I was doing nothing but grad school, and
Hmm.
working, and you're doing research and you're reading and you're going to seminars and you're, maybe you're working in a lag, maybe you're being a teaching assistant, like, and it's just, it consumes your whole life. And I got to the point where I wasn't having time to do things to take care of myself. I wasn't exercising like I usually do. I wasn't reading for pleasure anymore. I actually, for a period of time, didn't like reading because I was always reading, for assignments. And that's
Sure.
not me. I
Yeah.
love reading. So anyway, all this was going on when the pandemic hit. And all of a sudden, we were kind of forced to take a break from the things we had been doing. And that was probably the best thing that could have happened to me, was to go into lockdown and have to, kind of have a shift in what I was doing. And it was during that time that I got involved in, as you mentioned, Dr. Darrell Ray's program, Recovering from Religion. And they were doing a Monday night show called RFRX, which we still do every Monday night. Tune in. And I started going to that just to kind of, as you said, kind of build some community. I was lonely. We're all cooped up in the house trying to find Zoom meetings to join, in early 2020. And I found that one. And I really connected immediately with it, being a place where people could have a community around accepting that, hey, we may have all had a bad experience with religion. Some people didn't, and that's fine. But, it was a place where people could come together and just feel comfortable talking about the fact that they don't believe in the previous religion that they believed in before, and, working through issues surrounding that. And it was just a safe place to have those conversations. And so I started getting more and more involved in that and volunteering there. And then sometimes I would host the show, and it kind of grew and snowballed from there. And then I got involved with secular sexuality as well. And it's one of those things now where, like, I think we were talking about this earlier, Christy, it takes up a lot of your time, to the point where sometimes I'm thinking to myself, wow, I'm spending almost as much time on all of this activism as I am on, my regular job. But it's so much more fulfilling.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much different from, doing purely academic work, which there's nothing wrong with that. I come on here and recommend people's books and articles and research all the time. But to me, it feels very different to be writing an academic paper about something as compared to actually engaging with real people in real time. I I feel like there's a disconnect there for a lot of people, where you can get so sort of lost in your ivory tower that you forget what you're doing, even if you're writing about social issues, and it's important to you to talk about diversity and equality and inclusion. But to me, I felt like, well, I'm not doing any of those things. I was just reading and writing about them. I want to actually do them. And so being able to volunteer and just talk to people and help build those communities, to me, has felt tremendously more impactful and fulfilling just as a person. So I'm going to keep doing that, I guess.
Yeah.
I
Well,
love
and
it.
then Carol, I'll stay with you. Like, why secular sexuality? There are so many worthy causes, so many opportunities to get involved. I mean, there's just so much need in this world. Why spend your time with us talking about these particular issues? Actually, Laura, let me turn that to you. Why SecX?
Just kidding, Cara. No. Um,
Sorry, I think
so
I froze. Am I back?
no,
Yeah,
that's
lost
okay.
you for
Yeah.
just a moment.
Sorry about that. Not sure what happened.
That's
Were asking me a question, Christy, but did y'all move on from
Yeah,
that?
no, I wanted to hear from Laura just about why secular
Yeah.
sexuality in particular.
so, and it's interesting because this is my favorite of all the ACA shows, and the one that it's like my sort of like my little baby, right? And I think it has to do with the fact that I mean, everything is important, and there's a lot of really controversial social topics that need to be included and and talked about and pushed. But when it comes to sexuality and gender and relationship roles, I think it ruins a lot of people's lives. There's a lot of tension. There's a lot that people don't know about it. There's a lot of ways in which we're living because we feel like we have to live that way or because we're
Mm,
supposed to, when
sure.
that's not even true or not even the case. And so with my sort of adventure through two different religions and how it impacted not just my sexuality but also my concepts of gender, my concept of who I was and versus who I should be, um it it's very destructive, and I think that there really needs to be a strong counter message out there. And trust me, it's not all about the O's. The O's are great, but it's not all about like, "Oh, I'm just in this because sex is awesome and I wanna just tell everybody that sex is awesome." It is, but it almost has nothing to do with that. It has to do with how dysfunctional our society is as it approaches sex, gender, relationships, roles, and all that stuff. And I think secular sexuality gets into so many different topics and it touches on so many different things. I mean, it demystifies sex work, demystifies different gender roles and all that kind of stuff. Like everything that you can think of, demystifies different kinds of kinks. And it shows people the humanity behind it all
Mm-hmm.
and the realism of it and not this really sort of like evil, devilish, terrible sexual deviant side that a lot of the narrative shows, like the Christian narrative and even just our cultural narrative, because it really has bled into our culture. Like even outside of religion, our culture really does carry that narrative with it.
Oh, no question.
And yeah, yeah. So for me, it was really about getting more voices out there that are willing to talk about these things in a way that it's not salacious, it's not taboo, it's just okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so Kara, same question to you, I suppose. You were talking about just how much of your time is being taken up. Why silo some of it off for these particular issues?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think Laura really touched on the answer for me too, which is just that it's it's such an expansive topic. When we're talking about sex and gender and all of the issues surrounding it, we're talking about a lot of the big conversations about just what it is to be human and all of the issues that, we kind of swim around in society, social issues, all of that. And it's kind of fun. Like it's a little bit taboo and it's fun to do that. I'm not going to lie. That's part of the appeal. But I think it is important because it's a way of like you said, demystifying some of those things and taking away some of the stigma and some of the shame that people might feel around those, and actually making it, something that people can talk about that can really enrich their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Like getting rid of some of these bad ideas and tropes that I learned as a child. I mean, the sooner
Yeah.
you can get out from under those, the sooner you're going to have a more fulfilling life. So I don't want other people to miss out.
Yeah,
Right.
no doubt. I mean, I'll definitely say for myself that I owe, right? Like I
Oh,
was rescued
oh,
from a very bland, very quiet, very unfulfilling
Yeah.
sexuality, and that sexuality made so much of life bland and unfulfilling. And it was a lot of podcasts like this one that meaningfully helped pull me from that by just sort of normalizing these conversations, providing a little bit of information, and these sorts of things. So I feel very much dedicated to offering, like you said, Kara, some of that academic expertise that I carry as a sex counselor, just hoping to make the world a slightly better place on some of these issues because there's a need to right now, right? Like for much of the first quarter of this year, through this show I would get to talk to lawyers and journalists and these different types of activists and all of these different experts, and I would ask sex workers and all these different folks about sort of like the direction of the world. Does it feel like this issue is getting better? Does it feel like these things could really go to the worst possible case scenario? And I just heard over and over from people these like really diabolical predictions. And to be quite frank about it, many of them have come true in the last several months. So,
Yeah.
with all of that said, how does like the state or the direction of the world influence how you feel about some of this work?
okay. Yeah. There's a lot going on right now.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I
not
mean, when you look at the news, does that motivate you to do a show like this? I can completely acknowledge that it often is demotivating for me. Like, it'll take the wind out of your
Really?
sails to see what's happening in the news and to want to do this kind of work.
See, that's interesting. I totally get that. Seeing some of those news stories is, very devastating in some cases for me as well. And I do get cynical about, you know, humans are terrible. I hate them all, but
Mhm.
that's not really true. It's not my professional opinion, but it is demoralizing sometimes. But also, I think I can't remember who it was that was talking about this previously. It may have been on one of these shows actually, but they were kind of making the point that when we see these political decisions being made and things happening in the news and people being violent and things like that, one way to look at that is that it's kind of like this sort of panicked dying last gasp of sort of this older way of thinking
Mhm.
about sexuality and this
Right.
last attempt to try and wrest control away from the rest of society that is not going in that direction. We've had recently in the last couple of decades we've legalized gay marriage. We made contraception more available and all of these things. We talk more openly. We have shows like this. Kids these days have have a lot better access to information than we did when we were younger, and I think that scares a lot of people to see the world going that way, and so we're seeing these backlashes against it. And to me, it's been helpful to kind of think of it in that context. It's not that
Sure.
we're losing, it's that they're losing and they're having a fit about it. And so that means our work is doing something. We're having an impact. We're scaring the people that don't want to be nice to the other humans. And to me, that means that we are making an impact. And so if we can keep doing that, we're going to keep moving forward. There's some bumps in the road happening right now, but I want to be optimistic that that's what they are, and that we're going to move past them, and it's going to get better. But
Yeah. So
I
there's
tend
a
to.
sense for you of participating in the victory, like of getting
yes.
that much closer to making some version of the world or some piece of the world a better place.
Yes, exactly. We're moving it in that direction, and it's when it upsets people that shows that they're hearing it and they're seeing it and the change is happening, and that's a good thing.
Hmm.
Yeah, I tend to agree 100% with you that that is where it feels like it's going. And but then I also want to not push back, but maybe add in addition to that that it almost doesn't matter because whether
Mm.
their outward vehementance, like the increased social activism that's going on against some of these advances in human rights, right? Um, whether it's just their death cries or whether they really are pulling ahead and winning, I think one way or another our voices are super super important, but I like that you put it that way because that's more inspiring and it feels better. When you feel like you're fighting a losing battle, it can be very, very disheartening.
Hmm.
And I don't know, I can feel like sometimes I don't even wanna listen to the news. I don't even watch the news.
Sure.
When I heard about the Roe versus Wade thing, I just wanted to bury my head and be like, "Don't let's not talk about it. Let's not read any articles about it." I just need like a week to just not make that like an obsession of my life, right? Because it's hard sometimes. But I would disagree with Christy though, because that's kind of what gets me fired up. Like
Mm-hmm.
if I didn't have all this negative news or like if I didn't think that the message still needed to get out there, I don't think I'd be nearly as passionate about getting out and talking about it. Like I,
Bulletin board
doing
material, right? Like it gets you
yeah,
revved up to want
yeah.
to fix the problem.
Yes, I'm definitely like I've been called like a mother bear or like I get really like up on my pedestal and I fight for people and I get really fired up when injustices are done and I tend to want to stand up for people almost sometimes in ways that are bad and destructive um but I think if I thought that everything was peachy and good I don't think I'd even want like, if everybody thought the way that we did, we wouldn't even need our voices, right? Like,
Sure.
it doesn't even need to be said, right? Like, nobody's arguing that the color purple is purple, right? Because we all kind of agree to it, right? So,
But how do we know that what looks like purple to you looks like
it
purple
looks
to
like purple to
me?
All
you.
right, we only have
Yeah.
15, 20 more minutes left in this show. We're not doing solipsism.
Fine.
Yeah, it is fair to say that that whatever motivates people, wherever we are on some arbitrary grand narrative of human history, the fact is,
Mhm.
like, we're alive now. What do
Yeah.
we need to do now? And is this
Mhm.
part of it? So I definitely get that, and I suppose on the one hand, if it motivates you to feel like the world is burning and you're somebody with a bucket of water, then yeah, go out and splash that bucket around. If it feels to you like the world is just a beautiful garden and you're here to water some of the flowers in it, God bless you. I wish I had that sort of mindset, because I do
Right.
appreciate that notion of feeling like we are not just like bailing water out of a ship, but that we're actually doing something
Yeah.
beautiful in that way.
Mhm. Yeah.
Very well said.